I wake up every morning with a silent, ritualistic routine marked by sounds that replace images. The aroma of fresh coffee fills my kitchen before I even get up. Street noises come through open windows, bringing the vibrant atmosphere of New York City into my home. The city never sleeps. Car horns, hurried voices, street vendors calling out their offers, the distant sound of church bells. Everything composes a daily symphony that I learned to decipher since my vision became just a blur of lights and shadows. My name is Anthony. I'm 72 years old, and I've been living alone since Maria, my wife, left us 6 years ago. The little vision I had left disappeared shortly after, as if life had decided to cut one more of my roots. At first I tried to resist, forcing myself to go out even if it was just to the corner. But the city is immense and fierce for those who see little. An uneven sidewalk, a rushing bicycle, a broken traffic light, everything became a threat. The recommendation to adopt a dog came from my friend Vincent, a companion through difficult times, like so many we've faced together. A dog won't give you back your sight, but it'll give you companionship. And who knows, maybe even help you get out of the house. I didn't pay attention at first. It seemed impossible to care for any animal, imagining accidents, the water bowl falling, him running away. But loneliness was more dangerous. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming chapters. Your subscription helps keep this space of inspiration alive. On a sunny Sunday, I accepted Vincent's invitation to visit the Furry Friends shelter in Brooklyn. The atmosphere was cheerful, full of dedicated volunteers and dogs of all breeds, some jumping at the fences. I was unsure, guided by my friend's arm. But it was the volunteer's voice, soft and patient, that calmed me, describing all the dogs in the space so I could imagine each one. There are many who need love. We have a Labrador who arrived recently, very intelligent. I'd never seen anything like it. When Thor approached, I immediately felt the different energy. He didn't bark, didn't jump. He stood in front of me, smelled my shoe, sat down and gently rested his head on my knee. I extended my hand, touched his warm muzzle, and felt his breathing, rhythmic and calm. The volunteer explained, "That's Thor. He was abandoned but adapted quickly. He's very smart, loves to walk, but doesn't like staying still." I felt that animal was meant for me. The first days were about adaptation. I organized the house, scattered water and food bowls in strategic places, tested different commands, learned that Thor liked to sleep nearby, and that when I stumbled or hesitated, he would come running. The feeling of having company helped combat the painful silence of nights. It didn't take long for him to discover where I kept my canes, always alerting me when I forgot one lying around somewhere. The Labrador showed restlessness on walks. In my timid walks around the block, he went ahead, observing everything, but came back to check if I was following. Over time, I realized that Thor was memorizing all the routes. If the street was busy, he changed course. If he detected danger, he would stop and sit, waiting for me to pay attention. The owner of a newsstand once said, "That dog of yours seems like a ship's pilot. He knows how far to navigate safely." Like this video if you feel that second chances can change a life. Sharing is caring. The mornings began to have different tones. The breeze that swept the streets, the aromas from the delis, the presence of fruit vendors shouting their offers. Everything began to become more accessible. Thor gradually took the lead. When I said bakery, he took me straight there. When I said park, he'd turned at the right corner. I realized I was entrusting my mobility to him. In the weeks that followed, Thor expanded his urban knowledge, and we made new routes, increasingly bold. We went to the neighborhood market, to the pharmacy on Fifth Avenue, to my brother's house 4 blocks away. At first, I memorized the paths by sounds, smells, and neighbors' directions. But with Thor, it was enough to say the destination and feel the gentle tug of the improvised leash to know the journey would begin. The Labrador was never officially trained as a guide dog. I even thought about looking for specialized training courses, but Thor always surprised. If we found a closed street, he changed the route. If there was heavy traffic, he took us through alternative routes. Soon, our safety circle expanded to more than 50 known routes in the neighborhood. The neighbors began to notice. Children on the corner would say, amazed, "Look, there's Thor taking Mr. Anthony home again." Comment below if you've ever seen such a special friendship between a human and their pet. We want to read your story. The weather in New York City changes quickly. There are days when the sky threatens rain, heavy clouds pass, the wind picks up. I always get nervous in those moments. But Thor seems to sense my anxiety. He quickens his pace, guides me to covered areas, makes decisions I never imagined. Once, in the middle of a downpour, he entered a covered parking garage, waited for the rain to subside, and only then resumed the path. That gesture made me realize I wasn't alone. My family took time to accept this relationship. My brother thought it was risky to trust so much in an untrained dog, but it was enough to accompany us on a walk to see how Thor understood commands, avoided dangers, stopped at the right places. My daughter, who lives in Chicago, called intrigued, "Dad, how come you're getting out of the house so much now?" And I would answer, "I have a best friend who never abandons me." Little by little, Thor became known in the neighborhood. The pharmacy guy always offers a treat when we pass by. The bakery team already leaves bread aside. Thor greets everyone wagging his tail but never loses focus. He's attentive to my steps, always ready to protect. I even joked with the park people. I don't know who's more famous, me or him. Even my fears changed. Before, the fear was of accidents, getting lost, or being a victim of some urban danger. Now, even with limitations, I take a deep breath, hold the leash, and trust Thor, who always seems to know the best path. I learned to recognize the world through my four-legged friend's sensitivity. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any chapter of this story that's just begun. New York City thrives on diversity of sounds, smells, and rhythms. But with that come daily challenges for those who depend on more than just their own senses. Each morning, the city seems to renew its obstacles. New potholes appear on sidewalks. Streets undergo maintenance, vendors change locations, and car flow transforms according to the hour. For me, all of this was a puzzle hard to decipher. But Thor quickly showed that he saw changes as an opportunity to learn. We went out together, always after coffee, like two explorers in their own territory. The first major test was days after a walk to the pharmacy when construction appeared on the usual path and we needed to find another route. I stopped, hesitant, feeling around with my cane while trying to catch sounds that indicated the best detour. Thor, meanwhile, was restless, sniffing the air and heading toward the side street. I tried to resist since I didn't know that path well, but growing confidence imposed itself. I followed Thor, feeling his guidance and, for the first time, fully allowing him. If this story is inspiring you, subscribe to the channel to follow this incredible journey of overcoming. The detour was full of new sounds and different aromas, but to my surprise, Thor didn't hesitate. He avoided a bicycle parked on the sidewalk and moved away from the loud noise of a garbage truck, guiding me through streets I rarely traveled. Arriving at the pharmacy, I felt silent pride. My companion had memorized another route. In the days that followed, challenges multiplied. Dirt, traffic, vendors improvising stands on corners, and even a group of kids playing basketball right on the park's sidewalk. Thor, attentive as few, anticipated each risk, stopped before crossings, circled obstacles, and several times indicated through licks or tugs that something was different. I learned intuitively to interpret his signals. A sudden stop meant wait. A low growl was alert. The excited wagging of his tail told me the route was clear. The routine was consolidated. We went out to different destinations around the neighborhood. Thor became a kind of living map. It was enough for me to say the intention. Bakery, market, brother's house, farmer's market, and he, excited, would pull in the right direction. The number of memorized routes grew without me needing to teach. The Labrador seemed to use his own logic, mixing smell, sound, and maybe even memories of conversations between neighbors. Give it a like if you believe animals have a special intelligence we sometimes underestimate. On one of those days, I completely lost orientation after leaving the bakery. I was alone, Thor by my side, when construction noise changed everything. Another dog's barking distracted me. I lost my sense of direction. My heart raced. I felt panic approaching. Thor, sensing my distress, licked my hand, positioned himself in front, and gently pulling the leash began to lead. Turned right, then crossed the street safely, always attentive to my steps and car movement. In the end, I smelled my gate and knew I had arrived home. That episode radically changed my relationship with Thor. The confidence that was once timid solidified. I began to trust him completely, even on days when the city's noise tried to destabilize me. My neighbors began to notice that our bond was deeper. "He understands your feelings through your actions, doesn't he, Mr. Anthony?" commented Teresa, an attentive neighbor. The city seemed to adapt to our duo, but not without tense moments. One day we were almost hit when a driver accelerated at the intersection without respecting the traffic light. Thor stopped suddenly, pulling me forcefully backward. I got scared, stumbled, and fell, sitting on the sidewalk. I felt my pulse racing and tried to catch my breath. Thor remained by my side like a sentinel until hearing the driver's hurried apology and feeling I was well enough to continue. Comment below how you face moments of fear in your daily life. Your story can inspire others. Those episodes taught me two precious lessons. First, that trusting Thor guaranteed my safety. Second, that the world would never be totally predictable. There were tense moments, but also many of overcoming. Thor learned quickly, and I learned to hand over part of my fear to him. I discovered that the most important thing wasn't controlling everything, but knowing when to trust and follow. On a certain Sunday, I decided to visit the park furthest from the neighborhood, where I rarely went before Thor's company. The park was lush, with tall trees, children's laughter, trails, and fresh juice vendors. The route required crossing busy avenues, overcoming irregular sidewalks, and circling parked cars. I hesitated before leaving, but Thor seemed excited, noticed my intention, and positioned himself in front, waiting for me to give the command. Along the way, once again he demonstrated skill, avoided a puddle when he felt water under his paws, and crossed near a noisy group by detouring to the other side. Arriving at the park, I felt joy I hadn't experienced in a long time. We seemed like adventure partners, capable of conquering any path together. In the park, I sat in the shade of a tree while Thor lay beside me, panting but visibly happy. The contact of his body warmed my heart, made me feel less alone. Returning home that day, talking to Thor as if he were human, I understood that the bond between us was deeper than just physical safety. He was a source of hope and joy. Over time, Thor began to identify even nuances of weather conditions. On days with heavy, cloudy skies, he guided through safer routes, always avoiding streets prone to flooding. In intense heat, he sought shade, entered tree-lined avenues or covered parking lots. I felt he adapted the path according to need, almost as if reading my discomfort with bad weather. In a memorable moment, we were surprised by a strong storm. We had just left the pharmacy when clouds closed in and torrential rain began. Street movement became chaos, people running, cars honking, vendors collecting products. Thor didn't hesitate. He entered a semi-open garage, looked at me, and lay down, waiting for the rain to pass. We stayed there about 20 minutes, me telling him stories, grateful for the cleverness that had saved my day. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue learning how this duo faces the challenges of the big city. Over time, our routine, mine and Thor's, became a topic of conversation in the neighborhood, generating curious looks, smiles, and even some questions. Where there was once fear, there was now respect and admiration. Neighbors began to notice not only my renewed presence on the streets, but also how Thor commanded our paths, as if he were really my personal guide, always attentive to details and dangers, always faithful. At first, some were suspicious. "Mr. Anthony, are you sure that dog knows what he's doing? What if he makes a mistake?" These were words spoken with concern, but loaded with the insecurity that the city imposes on the different. I had already faced looks of pity and doubts about my autonomy since losing my sight, but with Thor by my side, I gradually conquered another identity, someone who was willing to trust, risk, and overcome dependence on fear. The first time we felt this neighborhood support was on a Friday, at the full farmers market. Thor always loved that movement, the sharp sounds of stalls being set up, the aroma of fresh fruits in the air, and the buzz of neighbors talking loudly. He guided the route precisely, avoiding crates and carts used to carry purchases, choosing routes where there was less noise and more space to walk. I noticed that the market vendors began greeting him, some even setting aside carrot pieces to spoil him. That's when I understood that our relationship wasn't just mine and his. Gradually, it was infecting the entire community. At the market, a lady named Martha, owner of a vegetable stand, came to talk to me. "Mr. Anthony, your little dog is a blessing, you know? I've never seen such an attentive animal. He takes care of you better than many people take care of others." I smiled, feeling that genuine recognition. Thor thanked with a loving look and a lick on her hand. There I realized that people began to see Thor as someone special, a symbol of animals' capacity to offer companionship, protection, and love without asking for anything in return. Give it a like if you've ever seen how a pet can transform an entire community. That transformation was profound because it brought to the surface a new feeling, belonging. After a long time feeling isolated by fear of the big city, my home and my neighborhood became spaces of coexistence, exchanges, and affection. I decided to try different routes, go to church on Sundays, to the Union Square Market on busy mornings, and even to the small cultural center that recently opened near the park. It was in one of these new places that I met someone who would have a fundamental role in that phase of my life, Renata, a volunteer at the cultural center. She always wore colorful clothes and spoke enthusiastically about literature and art. One morning, when I arrived with Thor at the center, she approached and asked permission. "Can I take a photo of you with your dog? We want to share inspiring stories of neighborhood people on social media." I accepted, laughing at imagining our duo on internet pages. With Renata, I talked about art, music, and the daily difficulties that visual limitation imposed. She showed interest in creating a project to include people with disabilities in the center's activities. It didn't take long for her to suggest that I give a small talk telling my story of friendship and overcoming with Thor. I accepted, overcoming the fear of speaking to a large group, driven by the desire to motivate more people to seek autonomy and trust in animals' potential. The neighborhood began to see us with different eyes. I received invitations to participate in community meetings, speak at schools, share experiences with parents concerned about teaching their children respect for differences. On each trip to the park, Thor greeted acquaintances, receiving pets and cookies, always maintaining a serious and protective posture when it came to guiding me. He was a mix of local mascot and silent leader. During this period, we faced real trials, like the day a group of cyclists crossed the park at high speed. Thor positioned himself in front, growling softly, diverting my path away from danger. On another day, during a walk to the market, he noticed there was spilled oil on part of the sidewalk and immediately changed the route, guiding me on the opposite side. These details transformed our connection into something beyond routine and safety. It was complicity. Share this video if you believe everyone deserves a second chance to shine. My emotional health strengthened. Even lonely nights changed. Now Thor slept beside the bed, attentive to any different noise. In those moments, I felt the world opening up for me, not because I had regained sight, but because I had found support and acceptance. The dog's friendship brought back my desire to socialize, discover, share stories and feelings. I experienced something I never imagined. Composing, along with Thor, a microcosm of affection and learning amid the city's rush. Time passed and our bond only deepened. I received letters from neighbors thanking for the inspiration, parents asking for tips on how to introduce animals to children, young people curious about how Thor worked. Increasingly, I realized our story was about integration, between people, between species, between different ways of seeing the world. But challenges didn't stop. On a Saturday morning going to the pharmacy, Thor suddenly stopped before crossing the street. A car was coming at high speed, completely ignoring the red light. For seconds I was afraid. But Thor acted without hesitation, stopped, pressed his body against my legs, preventing me from taking another step. The driver only realized the mistake when he had already passed, looking back scared. There, once again, I was grateful for trusting my friend's instinct and courage. In the neighborhood, stories began to circulate. Some said Thor was the street's secret guide, others that he understood what no one else saw. What I can guarantee is that those looks, gestures, and words of support made all the difference for me. Where there was once limitation, there was now a life expanding, full of challenges, but also friendships, coexistence, and hope. The cycle of days remained stable, as if time respected our rhythm. The city, however unpredictable it was, began to seem less hostile. Thor and I became known figures not only for our walks, but for how we faced daily adversities together. However, as in every journey of overcoming, periods of greater trial came, episodes that would test our complicity and the strength of that bond to the limit. The first major scare happened on a cloudy winter day. We had gone out in the morning to buy bread at one of the neighborhood bakeries. The routine was calm. Cross 2 streets, go around the corner of the newsstand, cross the central square, and arrive at the bakery, where Thor was already treated as a celebrity by the employees. But on our way back, Thor began showing unusual restlessness. Traffic increased. Street buzz became more intense. There were sirens in the distance, and the smell of smoke spread. I decided to stop. I felt Thor tense beside me, shaking his head as if trying to warn me. That's when an explosion of voices emerged. Residents were running in the opposite direction, shouting about a fire in a store ahead. Without seeing anything, I encountered only confused sounds and the strong smell of something burning. My instinct was to go straight, shortening the return route. Thor, however, pulled me firmly in the opposite direction from the crowd. If this story is moving you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss how this incredible journey continues. They were tense minutes. I heard hurried steps, screams, and the sound of firefighters arriving. Thor stayed by my side, guiding precisely. The usual route was abandoned. We went through another street that until then I didn't know. My senses were on edge. Every noise seemed amplified. Thor moved forward decisively, ignoring even the greetings from people who recognized us. His posture was serious, alert. I was afraid of losing him in a moment of confusion, but I felt more than ever that he knew exactly what he was doing. Arriving home, breathless, I was taken by a flood of gratitude. I let Thor drink water calmly, sat in the armchair, and tried to digest the scare. At the end of the afternoon, visitors appeared, neighbors wanting to know how we were. It was a demonstration of affection that moved me. There I understood that building relationships of empathy and support was one of the greatest achievements of that journey. The following days marked a strange fear, the idea of losing Thor, or that somehow I couldn't count on him in cases like that. I began thinking about the limitations of our bond. What if Thor got sick? What if the city presented challenges that not even he could overcome? The fear became stronger when Thor began showing signs of fatigue on some walks. The veterinarian, after examination, said he was just exhausted, recommended reducing the number of long walks, taking good care of his diet, and ensuring adequate rest. I followed to the letter, reorganizing routes, allowing Thor to recharge his energy. Those care measures taught me that trusting also means caring. I couldn't see, but I could feel his changes, the way he lay down, his breathing rhythm, the intensity of his gaze. A gesture, a different sound was enough for me to know my friend's limits. It was in that phase that I learned to respect his time, value reciprocity. Both of us needed to be well to face the city together. During the months that followed, we experienced other critical moments: excessive rains, flooded streets, sudden floods that forced route changes. Thor surprised with each new obstacle. It was enough to feel accumulated water or hear the different sound of puddles to change direction, always seeking safer paths. I saw our bond grow with each new emergency overcome. Comment below what your biggest challenge has been and how you overcame it. Real stories inspire more than any fiction. The neighborhood followed these small victories. In the park group, they commented on our courage, Thor's intelligence, and our joint strength. I gained nicknames. It's funny. The Blind Explorer and his Golden Guide, the neighborhood's golden duo. Thor was revered by merchants, by children who wanted to play with him, by neighbors attentive to our routine. It was during one of the rainy periods that I met Eduardo, an old and experienced neighbor, also with visual disability. He had another approach. He used a cell phone app to guide himself, counting on occasional help from his children. We talked a lot about autonomy, about the fear of always depending on others, and about how animals can contribute to the freedom of those living with limitations. The world is made of small overcomings, Anthony. You're lucky to have Thor, but also have courage to trust, Eduardo said in one of our phone conversations. In meetings at the Cultural Center, I began sharing not only my journey, but also doubts, anxieties, and joys. Renata supported the idea of creating workshops with themes of animal coexistence, respect for diversity, and inclusion. I became, without realizing it, a reference for other elderly people in the neighborhood, for families of people with disabilities, for curious children who wanted to understand how Thor knew so much. These exchanges strengthened me. It was no longer just about facing the city, it was about building a support network, learning from differences, and inspiring more people to seek autonomy despite difficulties. I realized that each crisis we overcame together strengthened not only our bond, but also the surrounding community. Not all days were easy. There were sad episodes. Thor got sick for a few days, relapsed with fever, and we spent hours at the veterinarian. I, alone in the waiting room, felt more vulnerable than ever until Renata appeared to support me. After medication, Thor recovered quickly, showing once again his resistance and will to live. Returning to the streets, resuming routine, feeling the wind, hearing the avenue buzz, and counting on Thor's partnership became, for me, a symbol of resilience. I understood that while we were together, we could overcome any obstacle. Time passed, and with each season, the marks of our story became even deeper. What was once just survival and adaptation now transformed into real autonomy. It was no longer just about leaving home without fear, it was choosing where to go with purpose and knowing there was safety alongside. New York City, with its infinite hustle, became the backdrop for our small daily victories. The routine reinvented itself. Thor already knew more than 50 different paths through the neighborhood, and I felt free to explore new possibilities. I decided to resume habits long left aside. I went with Thor to a public library where I met enthusiastic librarians who introduced audiobooks and thematic workshops for blind people. Thor, always curious, exhibited exemplary behavior, lying silently beside me while I listened to fragments of books about travels and adventures. I told my story in conversation circles for varied groups: elderly people, youth, families, people curious about the human-animal bond. Some asked if Thor really wasn't an officially trained guide dog, and I explained everything he knows was learned living with me, facing each day together. In each account, I sought to highlight how autonomy arose from companionship and trust built step by step. The partnership with Renata at the Cultural Center evolved. Together, we organized events called Possible Paths, meetings to share experiences about overcoming and adaptation in big cities. Thor became an expected presence, almost as requested as I was. At events, he gave true conduction demonstrations, guiding not only me but also volunteers who blindfolded themselves to feel the challenge. The laughter and surprised accounts showed how valuable it was to generate empathy in people. If you feel this story can change someone's perspective, share it now and help it reach more people. With invitations to participate in talks and festivals, Thor and I circulated more and more. We visited schools, scout groups, support associations for families with disabilities. I always carried the message that depending isn't weakness, but an opportunity to connect, learn from others, grow facing challenges. Thor became a mascot and symbol of perseverance. His photo stamped on posters, his figure mentioned in organizers' speeches. At home, life also became richer. My brother, formerly fearful about my autonomy, began to admire the relationship. He and my nephews came to visit, bringing toys for Thor and stories for me. On Sunday nights, we gathered neighbors to chat, share simple meals, and hear accounts from those dealing with limits and seeking overcoming. Thor, attentive, circulated among everyone as if understanding the responsibility of being part of that care network. I understood that autonomy is an absence of help, but capacity to make decisions and ask for support when necessary. The example spread. Other elderly people in the neighborhood began adopting animals, not only for companionship, but for stimulation to movement, coexistence, and sharing experiences. The neighborhood veterinarian, observing the positive effect, created guidance groups for those wanting animals even while facing physical limitations. Rain or extreme heat never stopped us. Thor knew when to shorten walks, when to seek shaded routes, when to wait inside a business until the storm passed. If any unforeseen event arose, we were ready. Neighborhood mechanics began helping with tips about safer places to cross, and merchants always offered water or a place to rest. The neighborhood transformed into a welcoming environment full of cooperation and kindness inspired by our example. My relationship with Thor also matured. I learned to respect his limits and celebrate his achievements. Special treats on holidays, long moments of affection after difficult walks, and the habit of mentioning aloud how important he was in my life. Thor seemed to understand every word, wagging his tail enthusiastically, especially when I said, "Today you were more than my friend. You were my hero." Local media began to take interest in our story. A reporter came to interview us for a neighborhood newspaper. The story resulted in a wave of support and gratitude messages, received by neighbors and even strangers from nearby neighborhoods. The repercussion increased my responsibility. I realized our routine could inspire real changes in the city and among people. I developed, along with Renata and other volunteers, an educational project in schools, focused on urban accessibility and animal respect. Children, always curious, asked questions about the relationship with Thor. Drew, the duo, invented stories where he saved the day. The school principal commented, moved, "You're teaching children about solidarity, autonomy, and empathy. That's priceless." At home, in quiet moments, I reflected on the meaning of everything we had achieved. The loneliness that hurt me so much was transformed into movement, communication, creation of authentic bonds. Thor, besides being guide and friend, became a symbol of human and animal capacity to adapt and create solutions facing adversities. We had family leisure moments, picnics in the park, guessing games with neighbors, long Sunday coffees telling news. With each walk, I felt the city had changed. Less indifference, more support, more eye contact, and above all, certainty that limits only exist until someone shows possible paths. At the height of the Possible Paths project, we received a letter from a support group in another city, asking for tips on improving inclusion in urban environments. I sent detailed accounts about routes, public space adaptation, and the protagonism Thor had in the process. I received a warm response. Our story was inspiring concrete changes in other neighborhoods. Among achievements, community work, and Thor's affection, I realized we grew together. I became, day by day, less dependent on fear and more dependent on genuine bonds with those around me. Thor, my bridge to the world, proved that courage and confidence can transform any reality. When we look back, Thor and I, we see a journey that seemed improbable. At first, seeking autonomy was more survival than hope. The days, once closed within four walls, opened to new colors and affections when I accepted the challenge of trusting an animal and consequently myself. The neighborhood took ownership of this story, and now I see how true belonging can be born from small daily decisions. In recent months, the Possible Paths project gained impressive momentum. More schools began working on accessibility themes. Teachers reported students more attentive to others' difficulties. Neighbors proposed sidewalk improvements, and merchants sought to adapt spaces for people with reduced mobility. The repercussion exceeded neighborhood boundaries, and we received invitations to participate in conversation circles in neighboring communities, always taking Thor, who no longer minded camera flashes and requests to pose beside children. My routine, which could be seen as limited, became a symbol of protagonism. The secret? Thor and I kept discovering each other every day, even facing the predictable. Love for my companion only grew. He was more mature, less hurried on walks, but equally attentive, sensitive. Feeling him age, increasingly wise, made affection even more intense. Time leaves marks, but never erases memories that truly matter. One Sunday, during an outdoor workshop, a child asked, "Mr. Anthony, did you ever try going out without Thor?" I smiled, moved, and answered that courage to face the world alone returned thanks to my companion's loyalty. I explained that Thor's greatest gift was returning meaning to my life, renewing hopes, and giving me back to the city. The bonds built inspired new initiatives, adoption fairs, dog training workshops, listening circles for elderly people who, like me, lost sight but not the capacity to dream. The house, once silent, transformed into a meeting point for students, neighbors, lifelong friends. Thor was celebrated at birthdays, holidays, meetings, a true host, always observing everything and everyone with that gaze, mixing affection and responsibility. Subscribe to the channel if this real story of overcoming is inspiring you to believe in new possibilities. Despite enthusiasm, moments of reflection about the future also came. Age arrived for Thor, and with it some physical limitations. We began adapting our pace, shorter walks, more rest, lots of water, and mainly lightness to accept that cycles change. I began valuing each simple walk, each lazy afternoon beside him in the park, each tight hug after a difficult day. One morning, Thor hesitated before going down the building stairs. A small gesture, but enough to make me stop. I remembered, in that instant, the first times we walked together. Him learning my steps, understanding my fears, molding routines our way. Now it was my turn to ensure his well-being, making adaptations that age demanded. I asked neighbors for help, talked with the veterinarian to guarantee comfort, created ramps, and always kept special care nearby. The community, aware of the process, engaged even more. Young people offered to walk with us, merchants asked daily about Thor and left treats aside. I became surprisingly less anxious about the future. If Thor needed complete rest, I knew I would never be alone again. Friends and neighbors were already an inseparable part of my routine. At the last big park meeting, Thor was there, lying in the shade, watching children play and adults chat. I was called to give a speech, and for the first time, felt the fullness of being heard not for limitations but for bonds created, for transformations inspired. I said with a light heart, if I can leave a message, it's that trusting builds bridges. No one needs to cross the world without support. When we find true affection, we manage to overcome any obstacle. I finished the speech, moved, thanking everyone and especially Thor. In that late afternoon, the park seemed illuminated by an energy of hope and mutual recognition. I said goodbye, feeling my Labrador's warmth, knowing that each of his steps at each stage was essential to transform my limits into possibilities and solitude into belonging. Life continues, and Thor, though less agile, is a daily reason for gratitude. I know the path we trace together doesn't end while there's will to continue, learn, and create bonds. Some stories, like ours, aren't made to end. They just transform, multiplying into other lives, other journeys, and other dreams. New York City, with its millions of inhabitants, infinite streets, and unstoppable rhythm, became for me not a dead-end maze, but a map of possibilities. Every corner Thor and I turned together, every risk we faced, every smile we awakened in neighbors, everything became a lesson that life can reinvent itself at any age with any limitation. Now, when I hear other elderly people complaining about loneliness or fear, I tell them my story. I talk about Thor, about the importance of opening up to the unexpected, of trusting those who extend a paw when we need it most. Some are encouraged to adopt a furry companion, others simply to leave home more, but everyone takes away the certainty that it's never too late for a new beginning. My life with Thor taught me that angels sometimes have 4 paws, a tail that never stops moving, and loyalty that knows no conditions. It taught me that being a guide isn't just showing the way, but walking alongside the other, adapting to their rhythm, respecting their limitations, celebrating their victories. In New York City's quiet nights, when noises calm down and only soft sounds of nightlife remain, I sit in my favorite armchair with Thor lying at my feet. There I reflect on everything we've lived, everything we've overcome, everything we've built. And I feel, deep in my heart, that this story is just beginning. Because true love, like ours, knows no endings, only new chapters waiting to be written. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it to inspire more people to believe in the power of true connections. Your comment and subscription are fundamental for stories like this to reach those who need them most.